part 2 of our Day 2 panel discussion. Coming up next, we'll be learning more about new ways of collaborating and sharing in the post-pandemic era, international perspectives in the second panel discussion. So just a warm reminder before we begin, for those who require simultaneous interpretation device, they've already been placed on the right-hand side of your seat. So you feel free to use them and pick your preferred language. Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 is 普通话 and Channel 3 is English. 我们在您的座位上已经放置，右边的位置已经放置计时传译设备，有需要的朋友可以调到你喜歡嘅頻道。頻道1是廣東話，頻道2是普通話，頻道3是英語。各位現場嘅觀眾朋友，如果需要即時嘅傳譯設備，我哋已經將佢嘅設備已經放置喺你嘅座位右手邊嘅位置。你可以調校你喜歡收聽嘅頻道，頻道1係廣東話，頻道2係普通話，而頻道3係英文。So this session will be moderated by Dr. Maria Mok. Dr. Mok joined the Hong Kong Museum of Art in 1996 and is currently the museum director. She has extensive museum experience and was previously the curator in charge of different departments, including China Trade Art, China Antiquities, Modern and Hong Kong Art, Education and Extension Services. Dr. Mok has also curated and led a vast number of exhibitions and programs. She is a specialist in China trade painting with a research focus on dating, authentication, and has authored an extensive collection of published works with particular interest in the artistic interaction of global trade. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Mok.
Good morning, everyone. I notice we have a very energetic crowd after coffee. Everyone wakes up, right? In the past couple of days, we have been hearing guests describing Hong Kong as a unique city, a city that is an international cultural destination with a strategic position bridging between China and the rest of the world. There is need for innovative models of collaboration today. And at the fourth and last panel, we are honored to have 4 prestigious museum experts to share with us their thoughts on partnership and resource sharing in the post-pandemic era. The first presentation of this panel will be delivered by Dr. Wang Shudong, Director of the Palace Museum. Dr. Wang graduated from the Lanzhou University. He is an expert on researches that focus primarily on the conservation of caves, ancient mural paintings, and earthen sites, as well as cultural heritage monitoring, early warning system, and preventive conservation. Dr. Wang served consecutively as Deputy Director, Executive Deputy Director, and Director of the Dunhuang Academy prior to his current engagement. Over his career that spans over 3 decades of experience and expertise in heritage conservation, merited with numerous awards and technical patents, Dr. Wang presided over many conservation projects at nationally protected key cultural heritage sites and international collaboration projects with cultural heritage protection and management institutions. So with a warm applause, please welcome Dr. Wang to stage.
Thank you, 莫馆长，谢谢谭主席，分成总裁，还有吴馆长，非常高兴啊，能够有机会来到香港，跟来自全球各 各地的一些文化机构的同事，还有博物馆的同事来分享各自的机构的这些文化合作、文化保护、文化交流尤其是在数字化时代、后疫情时代，我们包括博物馆在内的这些文化机构如何来推动文化的多样性，推动文明的交流互鉴。今天呢，我也借着这样一个机会向各位汇报一下故宫博物院在疫情时代和后疫情时代我们在文化交流合作中间的一些实践。大家知道博物馆就是任何一个国家的博物馆、一个地区的博物馆和社区的博物馆，它都是人类文明的一个保存地。这些承载着人类文明的各类文物，它经历了不同的时代，经历了不同的地域在不同的人们在与自然和社会进行交往的过程中，形成了这些实物遗存，留给了我们非常珍贵的，可以说记录了我们人类发展史上它的各个历史时期的这样珍贵的一些信息。这些博物馆从我个人来讲，简单的可以分为2类。一类呢，就是因为有收藏，它需要建这样一个场所去保存它，这样一类博物馆。还有一类博物馆是在皇家的宫殿及其它的收藏的基础上成立的博物馆，包括我所在的故宫博物院。就是当大家我们看到的这样一个在中国首都北京的核心区这样一个古代的建筑群，它自公元15世纪到公元20世纪初，在500年的这样一个时间段有24位皇帝经历了明代和清代这样2个朝代，生活在这，管理这样一个多民族的一个国家。在这样一个皇家的建筑群的建设过程中它无不体现了中国的文化中间的3大核心。一个呢，就是它的道就是我们认识自然规律和社会规律这是道，实际上就是自然规律和社会规律的这简单的这样可以表述。同时呢，它是在认识这样道的基础上，建立了一套非常完整的礼制，也就是来管理国家、来人与人交往我们建立一套非常严谨的这样一个制度。我们在故宫看到的这些它的不管它的建筑还是它的一些文化的存在，都是体现了我们中华文化的它的一些图腾，或者它的内涵，或者它的其中的体现了我们中国人在与自然进行斗争的过程中逐渐的发展过来的这样一种文化的存在。同时呢，我们在认识的道，然后建立了礼制，它最终的目的是要建立一个和谐的社会这样一个建立这个和谐社会的它的过程中，实际上我们每一位皇帝或者是我们的这个统治者，他对中华文化的那种理解和对那种最高的和的追求，就体现在他的这些皇宫的建筑中间来。我们看到的这前3殿就太和殿、中和殿、保和殿，它就体现的人与自然怎么建立一个和谐的关系，人与人就是我们社会怎么建立一个和谐的关系，人自身怎么能够建立一个和谐的关系，这3种和然后结合起来，就是一个中国人的我们追求的一个和当这种和能够真正实现的时候，我们的社会就是稳定的在发展。当我们这种和能够一旦被打破，可能我们的社会就像走向一个低潮所以这是非常重要的。同时呢，我们可以看到它的后3宫的这个文化韵味。后3宫呢，它的名称就是乾清宫、交泰殿、坤宁宫。就是乾坤实际上就是我们在周易里面非常重要的2个卦，乾卦、坤卦。就乾卦和坤卦一合，变成一个太卦就是天地之交，就是天空之交我们 这样它变成一个非常和谐的一个状态。就是我们这个世界，它就是一个矛盾的统一体。我们面对的任何的一个冲突和矛盾，我们不要去回避它，一定要去面对。当我们这些矛盾解决的时候，我们就会达到一个比较就是稳定的、比较和谐的、祥和的这样一个状态。所以在这些建筑中间呀，在建筑的文化中间，或者赋予它的一些文化的应用中间，我们都能够体现到中华文化的道、理、和这样一个核心。另外呢，在故宫博物院，我们收藏了将近200万件的文物啊，这应该是中国馆藏文物最多的博物馆，在世界上也能排到前5位。这些文物呢，它的来源有这样几个方面，一个就是历代皇家的承袭和收藏啊，因为皇家嘛，皇帝一定是他要对文化的尊崇，他一定要体现在对过去的这些古物的这样的一种尊崇之上的啊。这些文物啊，可以说从新石器时期一直延续到他们所在的那个朝代啊。另外呢，就是清宫征集，就像社会、像民间去征集一些非常珍贵的这些古代的艺术品，或者是古代的这些器物等等。还有一个非常重要的内涵，就是宫廷的制作，它体现了我们这个皇家对物质文化和精神文化它的一种追求啊，实际上也体现了一个国家这个统治者他的审美的追求，他对管理国家的一种理念体现在他的这些宫廷制作中间来啊。还有就是君臣的作品啊，他们的文学作品、他们的艺术作品也是体现的对中华文化的那种认识、理解，还有对它的实践，对它的发展啊。另外一个来源就是重大的文化工程啊，还有那些记录他们管理国家日常生活的那些档案。所以这些文化工程啊，只有在国家非常就是经济发展非常程度非常高的时候才可能做到，而且只有这国家能够完成这样大的文化工程。我们看到的一些古今图书集成啊、四库全书啊、什么永乐大典等等这些。另外，我们从故宫的建筑和它的馆藏的文物中间，我们可以看到一种多元文化的这样的交融的现象。从这些建筑里面，我们看到不同的宗教的场所能够在同一个宫廷里头同时存在，包括佛教的，包括道教的，包括萨满教的等等，包括我们的城隍的这个我们中国人的一个原始的信仰啊。另外呢，我们也可以看到就是东西文化的中西文化的这样一个交融从林昭轩我们看到他也这些皇家的生活也希望能够有跟西方的一些生活把它引入进来。我们在倦勤斋里头可以看到，就是来自西方的这些传教士，最后变成了西方的画家跟宫廷的画家，然后跟中国的艺术要融合起来，形成的这样的一些通景化的这些装饰。所以在清宫里头，它同样就是那种文化的交融不同宗教的交流是普遍存在的。只有这种交流，才能够促进文化的发展才能够促进对不同的宗教信仰、不同地域的人们他们的理解相互的理解、相互尊重。我们还可以看到一些外国文物。我这讲的外国文物，不是我们中国人从其他国家抢来的东西，是一种文化交流的产物，是一种贸易交流的产物是科技交流的产物。所以从这个中间也可以体现，就是中国人实际上他是一个爱好和平的民族他不会去轻易去抢别人的东西。所以这些不同的文化的交融，我们也体现在它的宫廷制作呀，还有其他的一些文物中间它的一些其他地域的文化元素能够在宫廷里头能够形成。实际上在中国，它是一个多民族的统一的国家，地域非常辽阔，我们地域的文化也是非常丰富的。它不仅仅是我们要跟西方呀，跟丝绸之路沿线呀，什么 跟印度文明和各个中亚文明两河流域的文明去交流。我们不同的地域它之间的文化也是需要相互交流的。在这种交流过程中，形成了我们的这样的一个多民族的中华文明实际上我们在这些宫廷收藏的画里面可以看到中西方绘画有机交融的这样的杰作。如果没有来自西方的传教士他们把欧洲的绘画艺术带到宫廷里头来，那我们怎么能够看到这样的一些艺术的杰作见证我们文化交流的那样一种过程？所以故宫博物院今天在新的历史时期，我们要通过平安故宫，要通过学术故宫，要通过数字故宫，还有活力故宫，利用一切的科技和管理的手段，肩负起真实完整的保护并负责任的传承弘扬故宫承载的中华优秀传统文化的历史使命。因为故宫它是三位一体，第一，它是世界文化遗产地；第二呢，又是我们国家的一级博物馆；第三，也是中国最著名的旅游目的地。这三位一体带给我们的那种任务带给我们的使命是非常的艰巨和神圣。我们必须要通过一切的这种科技和管理的手段，要通过多学科的融合，需要国际国内的合作没有这些国际国内的合作，我们的能力和水平不可能提高，我们不可能及时的去向我们的同行学习来面对我们承担的这样重大的任务。当然我们也需要有愿景，因为这样愿景是给我们定了一个比较高的一个目标让我们不断的向同行学习的这个过程中来提升自己。四大愿景，第一就是要建成国际一流的博物馆，就是向我们今天在座的这些国际同行学习。第二，要建成世界文化遗产保护的典范因为故宫它是中国的第一批世界文化遗产它的保护应该要成为一个标杆，要把一些保护管理的理念要推广到全国去。第三呢，要成为文化和旅游融合的引领者，因为文化资源是旅游的非常重要的资源，我们希望把文化和旅游活动能够紧密的融合在一起，这也是我们中国政府提出的非常重要的一个发展的方向。第四呢，要成为文明交流互鉴的中华文化会客厅文明只有交流互鉴，才能够成为一种多样的精彩的这样的让我们人类能够共同享受的这样一种文化现象。所以广泛的国际和港澳台的合作是故宫博物院多年以来始终坚持不变的。未来呢，我们会继续扩大这样一个朋友圈，向不同的我们的这些同行学习他们在某一方面的一些先进的经验。当然其中展览是非常重要的一种形式过去是这样，现在是这样，未来依然是这样。因为只有通过展览，我们不同文化之间可以有一个对话的这样一个机会当大家走到一起的时候，就会发现我们人类的文明的多样性是无时无刻不存在的，就是无时无刻都是存在的这样的一种多样性。也能够发现我们在人类发展的过程中，我们认识世界认识人的这个视角可能不一样，导致的我们可能得到的一些结论也是不一样的，这就是我们的差异。但是有很多我们可以找到一些相同点，差异和相同点都是我们都应该去面对的只有了解了以后，我们才能够相互理解，才能够相互尊重。所以这些展览一方面有走出去的，有引进来的，还有一个对比展。现在对比展已经成了我们跟国际交流的一个非常重要的形式，就是有我们兄弟博物馆的藏品，还有我们故宫博物院的藏品，大家奔着一个主题去把它放在一起，去进行一个对话交流让观众从中理解这种文化的多样性，也能够理解我们差异的原因在哪里也能够去找到一些共同点。我觉得 找到共同点和找到差异都是我们的目标。另外，考古，联合考古。过去我们沿着海上丝绸之路跟一些沿线国家进行了合作，我们在陆上丝绸之路也有一些合作。在疫情之后，我们又重启了跟阿联酋的合作这个考古通过联合考古去发现我们的古人他们曾经也在交流他们那个时候那么艰难的条件都在交流，我们今天这样一个科技如此发展的时候，我们还有什么理由不交流不对话？所以这个海外考古是非常重要的。这些考古不仅仅是我们跟对方的一个，我们还可以跟英国的一些团队一起形成一个多国的一个考古的团队走出去。另外，广泛的文化交流包括这些使节走进故宫就是各国的使节同时他们组成这样一个联合的一个活动，到故宫来来了解这样一个承载着中华5000年文明的这样一个遗产地这样一个博物馆去认识古代的中国。我觉得认识古代的中国是为了更好的认识今天的中国，也能够真正的建立起一个就是彼此理解的桥梁。另外呢，我们也通过学术交流平台，类似像这样的一种高水平的对话平台是非常必要的。我们已经举办了6届太和论坛，就是邀请来自不同国家的、不同文明背景的，甚至不同宗教背景的这些专家学者博物馆的同行来一起进行一些交流对话。我们每年每一届都有一个主题我们去年的主题是聚焦国际交流、文物保护的国际交流、合作与共享。这也是为我们申请建立国际标准化组织的一个文化遗产保护专业委员会做了一个非常好的一个铺垫在这样一个论坛上，就是来自不同国家的这些标准化的专家，还有我们文物保护的专家、博物馆的专家，大家共同来探讨怎么能够在文物保护这个领域实现国际的合作、国际的共享，让大家的那些经验能够及时的分享给我们的同行，让他们更好的去保护好自己博物馆、自己遗产地自己国家的那些文化遗产。人才是非常重要的，没有人没有高水平的人才队伍，我们的事业没有办法发展。我们在这个过程中也通过国际博物馆协会国际文物保护协会来成立相关的培训中心，来承担国际人才的培养，就是来自世界各地的这些年轻的这些专业人员走到一起他们在就一个主题进行培训的过程中，也能够把各自的文化带过来那种文化的对话非常的，我觉得是特别的鲜活让人与人之间的一个距离更近了。所以疫情时代把我们人与人之间的交流给切断了，那后疫情时代就带给了我们很多的思考。大家是不是只能就是通过网上就可以进行交流呢？是可以，但是面对面走到一起非常之重要所以这个培训中心我们从去年已经开始重启，今年是完全恢复。还有国际文物保护修复中心的这个培训中心的一些合作今年我们全面启动。现在呢，我们成功的申请完成了国际标准化组织文化遗产保护技术委员会这样的一个任务，全票通过将来的秘书处要放在北京，放在故宫博物院这实际上就是我们作为一个负责任的大国，作为一个文化遗产大国我们也是应该是文化遗产保护的这样一个国家，就是资源丰富的国家，应该为国际同行提供这样一个交流的平台。秘书处是在中国，但是它是一个开放的一个国际性的组织它不是中国的组织它是国际标准化组织下面的一个第2级组织所以我们希望通过这样的一个组织能够把文物保护的技术的 经验形成标准最后变成一个国际的标准，然后让大家共同去遵守。合作和共享在这样一个快速发展的时代，在一个百年未有之大变局的时代，确确实实存在着许多的挑战。这些挑战包括来自自然灾害就全球变化导致的自然灾害的这些影响，来自局部地区的冲突来自这种互联网上的一种某种程度的一种撕裂来自我们大家对不同文化之间它的差异存在的差异的那种恐惧甚至是一种不理解，我觉得都给我们的文化交流，给我们的这个世界带来了很多的不确定性。所以我们文化机构的同事们我们的同行们应该借助于我们的博物馆，借助于我们的这些世界文化遗产地来进行交流，进行合作，去研究它，去阐释它刚才前一个三生在这儿怎么去阐释要站在全球的视野，站在人类文明的这个高度去看各自的我们的文明。只有把自己的文明放在人类文明的这个视角下去看的时候，我们有什么可以不对话的呢？有什么可以去争斗的呢？只有对话才能消除我们的隔阂，才能消除那些纷争，最后建立一个非常和谐的这样一个美好的世界。未来故宫博物院将愿意更加开放包容的一个姿态搭建平等共享的交流平台，将故宫博物院建成文明交流互鉴的中华文化会客厅，通过我们博物馆界的这样的文化交流活动来消除我们的隔阂，来维护世界文化的多样性来构建我们习近平主席提出的人类命运共同体这样一个伟大的理念。让我们一起努力，为一个和平的美好的世界的构建做出我们博物馆人的贡献。谢谢大家。
谢谢王院长。Thank you, Dr. Wang, for a very comprehensive presentation. In fact, I regret a little bit listening to him because he practically answered all my questions sent to him earlier. So I probably have to think of new questions for the discussion part. Next, we would like to welcome Monsieur Laurent Salmet, Director of the National Museum of the Palais of Versailles and Trianon. Laurent was being appointed Director of the National Museum of the Palaces of Versailles and Trianon in 2016, where he pursued a firm policy of refurbishing the palaces, expanding the programs, and enriching the collections. He was previously serving as director and key officials of various French museums, such as the Musée de Grenoble, Museum of Fine Arts of Rennes, and Museum of Rouen, and the Réunion des Musées Nationaux Grand Palais, where he was in charge of exhibition programs of both the Grand Palais and the Musée de Luxembourg in Paris before 2016. He has organized over 100 exhibitions, including the very popular A City for Impressionism, as well as many retrospectives at the Grand Palais in Paris and other contemporary art projects. He graduated from the l'École de Louvre with a degree from the French National Institute of Cultural Heritage after winning the first prize in the competition for curator of the museums of France. So a warm welcome to our champion of curators, Laurent.
Thank you, Maria. It's an honor and a great pleasure to participate in this summit, and as my predecessors, I want to thank the organizers for this excellent program. I'm happy to share our experience at Versailles, which can be a kind of paradox as an institution representing really a completely national, completely French symbol, a symbol of French history, politics, and art. And of course, it's also a place that we need to share with the whole world, because at the same time, Versailles is completely French, and it does not really belong to the French people only. It belongs to the world heritage. Just an image to recall that the fact that Versailles in its body is made of international relationships. This is a sketch by Charles Lebrun for the Staircase of the Ambassadors, one of the very famous architectural pieces of the palace, although it was destroyed in the 18th century. And this is supposed to represent the nations of Asia, which you all recognize here. And the staircase itself, this is a maquette because it was destroyed. You see that at the center of Versailles, it's a system of welcoming the whole world in the palace. So it's all about exchanges. And even if it tells a very old story, we are now in charge of sharing it with audiences from all over the world and in all possible ways. I go on with history, and this is the famous embassy from the King of Siam sent to Versailles in 1686. And it had the great result of bringing us the only surviving piece of royal collections of silver in Versailles, because all the rest has been melted during the different wars. And it's quite funny to think that all that remains of the great royal silver collection of France is that Chinese teapot of the 17th century that was offered to Louis XIV by the ambassadors of Siam. And it went then to a private collection and was given to the museum by LVMH. Louis Vuitton recently was one of our major acquisitions, and it's part of a great exhibition that we will open very soon in Beijing next Monday with my friend Wang Zudong. We're about to open a big event symbolizing this exchange and proximity between Versailles and the Forbidden City. Another example of this very international nature of the collections of Versailles, this is a gift from the King of Poland to the Queen of France, Mary Lysinska, and it's German porcelain, it's Meissen. It tells stories from the Middle East. You have those merchants, the marchands levantins, as they called it in France. So it's a completely international object, a gift, a diplomatic gift also. And it's the kind of things that make the style and the atmosphere of Versailles. So Versailles, in fact, is not so French. It's completely international in itself. This is an example, of course, of those famous objects which are a complete fusion between West and East. Chinese objects changed into the ultimate French style. That can be porcelain with the mounts, or cabinet making made with Chinese lacquerware. So this is the basis of what we use to explain the long-lasting relationship starting in the 16th, 17th century, especially with the role of the Jesuit fathers and all those curious and modern people who were courageous enough to travel and understand the culture of such a different country. Just a few other images of this importance of the difference of far cultures for French art. And just to insist on the fact that there will be no French art without Chinese art or Chinese culture. This is a sleigh with a decoration of Chinese winter games. Of course, you may already know the famous series of the exotic hunting scenes of Louis XV that were decorating the Petite Galerie in his private apartment in Versailles. And although hunting was a daily practice for the king, he liked to imagine himself hunting in very exotic countries, including China. The painting on the right is the last one that was commissioned, and it's the Chinese hunt. I don't know what's so Chinese about it, but I'll let you judge that. Chinese art was also essential in creating the most typical French productions of the 18th century. You see an example of Sèvres porcelain. You know that, of course, the obsession in France was to imitate this mysterious technique of the porcelain, and they couldn't really do it until they found the material in France in the middle of the 18th century. But they were not only using Chinese motifs as a decoration, they were also imitating forms, even though it's a completely different thing. It has nothing to do with Chinese porcelain, but it's supposed to be completely Chinese. And just as Louis XVI commissioned this portrait of Emperor Tianlong, made from a portrait done by a Jesuit father in China. This was from his private collection. Marie Antoinette also, with this ring game that was installed in the gardens of the Petit Trianon. It was very fashionable at that time. That I'm not sure it was even so popular in China, but you're supposed to catch a ring with a stick. And you see this little Chinese palace next to the Petit Trianon, which is the typical neoclassical French castle. Of course, China is not the only source of inspiration for the French court. Japan is also very important, and Queen Marie Antoinette owned one of the most beautiful collections of Japanese lacquer boxes. I'll just show you a few examples. They were offered to her by her mother, the Empress of Austria. So you see how completely international this all is. There's also the fantasy of the Middle East. In that case, it's less based on real relationships. It's more imagination. And with this very splendid clock, La Pendule au Sultan, and you see it's a kind of fantasy with these women and the bases with the camels, the ostriches. And a kind of symbol of that curiosity of Versailles was this menagerie. It was a castle in itself, built very early from the beginning of Versailles in the 1660s, a castle from where you would observe one of the first big zoos in Europe, and all the different areas, of course, are filled with animals from all over the globe. It has very quickly disappeared, and we know it now thanks to digital recreations, which are, of course, one of the classic ways for us to share this history with the public when we can't take them there anymore. I think the link doesn't work, and we don't have time to manipulate all our virtual tools that we develop around the collections, but you might want to explore and go through the Petit Trianon in a 3D reconstruction. You can zoom, enter, and everything you want on using that link. And that complex history, we try to make it very easy to understand and clear. This is an example of a digital system that you can see when you start your visit in Versailles. It's the only digital part of the visit because we like to insist on the real atmosphere rather inside, and we use the digital elsewhere. But this is it's a film. This is just a still from this film that shows you how the palace has grown and transformed across the centuries. One of our very useful ways to share this heritage with a distant audience was to create that virtual exhibition called Virtually Versailles. And Hong Kong has been an important step in this project because the show has been organized in two venues here recently at the Heritage Museum and then in Macau in the last summer. And it's going to travel to Hangzhou soon. So it has become for us a very important project. It's 100% digital. It evolves and improves at each venue. And for us, it's really important because we know that a certain part of the Chinese public will not travel to Versailles. We are still expecting you to come back. China was 12 to 14% of the visitors of Versailles before the pandemic, and now it's just 2%, but I think you're going to come back very soon, and we're expecting this. But in the meantime, we have this, I think, quite nice virtual exhibition. That you can take a bicycle and go through the park of Versailles with a film giving you the illusion that you ride a bike in the park, which is in fact not possible in the reality. It's only in that exhibition. Bikes are not allowed in the park. A few other images of the display. You see immersive spaces. This is the little theater of Queen Marie Antoinette in Trianon. And of course you have also the typical 3D immersive system, where you can even see more things that you would ever see in reality, because if you're courageous enough to crouch and go under the furniture, you can look up and see the marks under the furniture, something you cannot do when you're in the real museum. A more traditional way to share the collections with the whole world is, of course, the traveling exhibitions that Versailles has been very active with. This was an example in Australia, in the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra. I would say today I would prefer to do something with Melbourne, which has such a different feeling, especially now that we know everything about the precinct in Melbourne. But this has been an important project for Versailles, with very important works of art traveling to Australia. Another example of this exhibition in Canberra, this is more around Queen Marie Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette was the star of one of our other very important projects in Tokyo at the Fuji Museum, a very ambitious exhibition where we recreated a few spaces from Versailles. This is an example with the bedroom that she wanted to have at the ground floor of the palace. You know, Marie Antoinette was constantly asking for new spaces, new apartments, and that was one of the last bedrooms she wanted to be closer to her children in the late 1780s. And temporary exhibitions are also an opportunity to do things in a different way, something we wouldn't do in Versailles, in the permanent galleries, of course, but even maybe not in an exhibition in France. And for instance, here, this is a part of the exhibition in Tokyo, and you have this reproduction of a drawing where you see the big party for the wedding of the Dauphin, the future Louis XVI, with Marie Antoinette. And you can understand from the drawing the place of this table centerpiece, which is a very important object that we never know where to show in Versailles, but we like to show it in temporary exhibitions, and it was a sensation in Tokyo. Another important partner for us, of course, is the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and this has been really a groundbreaking experience for all French museums to work on this collaboration of a network of French museums with Abu Dhabi. It's both temporary exhibitions and long-term loans, which create a new universal museum. And as you know, in France, we are very obsessed with this idea of the universal museum. So this was one of our recent exhibitions, also about connections and interactions between Versailles and the rest of the world. And here are a few images of that exhibition. There was a lot about sciences, like we will also develop in our Chinese exhibitions this year. I think I forgot to mention that for those of you who don't want to travel to Beijing, there will be another version in Hong Kong soon, so you can have it at home, a great exhibition on the relationship between Versailles and China that we're working on with Louis, and you'll discover very soon at the end of this year. That exhibition in Abu Dhabi was an opportunity to try something to explain an important set of paintings that was acquired recently by the museum. It was in a private collection of a descendant of the the Lady of Honor of Queen Mary Lisinska, who was very proud to have painted herself the paintings of her Chinese cabinet. And we, of course, the room has been destroyed, but we have the drawings by the architect, Gabriel, and we had this idea to enlarge the drawings and show the actual paintings on that drawing, which gave us the idea to recreate this in the permanent galleries of Versailles. So that was an example of a temporary exhibition giving an idea for a permanent display. And this is just another example of the long-term loans that we do in Abu Dhabi, which are also, I think, a very interesting way to have a presence with very typical works, like you see the horses of the sun on the left and the parts of the world who belong to the large commission by Louis XIV, with this whole philosophical system illustrated throughout the gardens of Versailles. We also sometimes lend very iconic paintings, like the famous Napoleon passing the Alps. But of course, you will never have exactly the feeling that you have in a museum which has been built, especially in the case of Versailles. Spaces have been created around the works of art. So for instance, here the crowning of Napoleon, that's something you can hardly recreate somewhere else. You can't really do it virtually. You have to come. In the end, it's the only real way to feel the reality of Versailles. Other things we try to do to share as widely as possible around Versailles is with music. We have a new program with young electronic music composers who've been using Versailles, its materials and sounds to compose, like Tilassine here, or Fakir, that's a play on words in French, who has used many sounds from Versailles, like here the clock sounds, to compose his music. And it's also a way to feel Versailles. It can be the clocks or the fountains in the gardens, as you've seen. Another way for us to expand and speak to a broader audience is, of course, contemporary art. I was struck to realize when I was part of a group of museum directors, I remember a few years ago, to realize that my colleagues from the United States or from Europe or Asia could only think of contemporary art when they thought of Versailles. And that was the only reason why they had come in recent years. Oh yes, I've seen Jeff Koons, I've seen, and it has become incredibly important for Versailles, which is a paradox also, because in a way it has nothing to do with the history. But I think it's been a very successful program. Here you have Jeff Koons. It's also a way to collaborate with foreign countries. Most of these artists were foreign artists. Another example from Asia, Yu Fan, who made one of the best contemporary exhibitions in Versailles. Anish Kapoor. And these artists very often have a way to encapsulate and to understand the mysteries and the magic of the place, especially this cosmic dimension of Versailles. You know, it's also a kind of Stonehenge. It's a place made in accordance with the planets, the sun. It's all about the myth of the sun. And Anish Kapoor has made a fabulous job with this. Versailles is famous for its fountains, which have been an inspiration for many international artists also. I'll only show you one example with Olafur Eliasson, the famous Danish artist, who has created not exactly a fountain, but something even higher than the greatest fountains of Louis XIV. And we even have now a contemporary permanent fountain, a new grove, the Bosquet du Théâtre d'Eau. And this is a reproduction of the sketches of the choreographic notes of the ballets of Louis XIV. So it's the dancing steps that have been transformed into a fountain. It's a work by Jean-Michel Otoniel, one of the best-known French artists of the time. So the only permanent contemporary work of art we have is by a French artist, but maybe this can change in the future. At least the inauguration, it's an American artist who performed for the inauguration of this fountain. It's Lil Buck, a more popular way to share with dancing is this very popular app in France. I don't know about Asia, but Just Dance is an app, a tutorial that has been developed by Ubisoft. And we recently had a big party in Versailles to inaugurate. It's a way to teach you the choreography. I don't think we have time for a real session now. I could have shown you the choreography of this dance. But it's been a very big success. Of course, it's a little bit of a cliche, or it's a bit kitsch, but it's also a way to enter into the dream and the fascination of Versailles. And then once you've done something like this, you can always hope you will want to discover more. Of course, it steps from this great tradition of feasts and parties in Versailles, starting from the famous Plaisir de l'Île Enchantée. This was a 4-day party that Louis XIV organized in 1664, and ever since, Versailles has been the place for shows and entertainment at a very sophisticated level, which we continue now. And of course, now fireworks, and it's also supposed to be a source of pollution, so we replace them progressively with drone shows, but we still have fireworks all the time in Versailles. And this is just a little joke with this logo of Versailles that's been recreated by those drones. But I wanted to, as a conclusion, to show you a few images of this myth of Apollo, because it's become a sort of logo or a brand, but it's not such a, of course, it's very meaningful for us. It's all about maybe what makes people come to Versailles. It's not to admire the power of France. I don't think that's the reason why people come from all over the world. It's because we all feel that there's a mysterious quest of beauty and meditation in Versailles, and the myth of the sun god, of course, is the center of all this. And you have here 2 examples of the paintings inside the palace, one of the ceilings on the left, and you see the character in the lower part. It's France with her coat with the fleur de lis, and she's a little sad and meditating, just like on the right, Clytia, who fell in love with the godson, and she was punished to be transformed into a sunflower and would spend her whole life following the course of the sun. And you see the melancholic and deeply philosophical meaning of that myth of the Sun King. And because I don't want to always concentrate on this idea of the sun in Versailles, I would like to conclude with a very different image. 2 examples of another aspect of the collections of Versailles, which, as very few people know, is also kind of national portrait gallery. This is more a British or American concept and never really existed in France, but in fact Versailles is also that. And we have an enormous collection of paintings and sculptures dedicated to all the glories of France, so it's completely French, but then again, I like to think that maybe it's something that can be shared internationally. Here you have 2 very fascinating characters. On the left, it's Rosa Bonheur, the now famous woman painter who was one of the most independent, modern, free women in the 19th century, and famous for her paintings of animals. And on the right, it's Victor Hugo, the iconic portrait that you see in all history books and literature books, and nobody knows that it's in Versailles. It's a hidden part of our collections, but I like the fact that they both seem to be dreaming or meditating, just like the other characters I showed you before with Apollo, the sun god. So this is an image of the diversity of Versailles and how difficult, but also how exciting it is to share with everyone around the planet, which is much more fun than welcoming the French audience, although we try to get them back to Versailles, because as Miguel said before, at some point, the French public was almost afraid of the Chinese because the Chinese were so many, and it was very funny to see how things reach a balance. And I think we're there. Maybe the pandemic will have had this very good result to create a new connection between visitors, because we feel that the behaviors are different. People discuss more together. The groups are not the same. Our foreign visitors spend more time. They're in smaller groups. They go in more in depth into the collection. So I think this is all very encouraging for the future. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Laurent. Thank you, Monsieur Salomé, for a very enlightening talk. First time I've had the director tells me that Versailles is not so French. Give us a lot of thoughts. Next on stage will be Mr. Makoto Fujiwara, Executive Director of the Tokyo National Museum. Mr. Fujiwara joined the Ministry of Education, Science, Sports and Culture in 1982, and he was appointed as the 29th Executive Director of the Tokyo National Museum in 2022. He has held various key positions in the ministry over the years and leading operations in many fields such as education, culture, sports, and science technology. At the Tokyo National Museum, he oversaw the special exhibition, Tokyo National Museum is History and National Treasures, which was the first time the museum displayed all of the national treasures in its collection. The exhibition welcomed more than 350,000 visitors, and as well as other anniversary events held with great success. Under his leadership, the museum has made significant strides in enhancing accessibility for international visitors. Mr. Director, please.
Good afternoon already. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful summit. And I would like to speak Japanese from now. So please prepare headphone. 2022年に私が第29代目の館長として就任しまして、すでに1年10ヶ月が経ちました。152年の歴史ある博物館のリーダーとして、2つの大きなスローガンを職員と共有し、館外に発信しています。本日はその2つのスローガンを紹介し、それに即して最近の情勢を踏まえながら当館でどのような取り組みを行っているのか紹介したいと思います。最初の一つは150年後を見据えた持続可能な博物館です。この写真は1872年日本国内で最初の博覧会を開催した時のもので、日本に最初の博物館を作ったメンバーになります。日本で一番歴史がある当博物館では、開館以来、積極的に文化財を収集し、現在では質量ともに日本でナンバーワンの博物館となっています。 しかしながら近年の財政的な困難、設備の老朽化など、いろいろな問題を抱えているというところであります。そこで、今後150年後も持続可能な博物館となるべく、財政基盤の確立、経営体制の刷新を私のリーダーシップの下で進めているところであります。2つ目の私のスローガンは、世界に冠たる博物館です。東京国立博物館は、その152年の歴史の中で、世界中の文化財を展示してきました。その実績は日本国内にとどまらず、世界中のミュージアムと比較して遜色ないものと自負しています。これまでもアジアの博物館を中心に国際的な関係を築いてきましたが、今後は世界の博物館としての意識を高めて、いろんなところとの連携強化を図っていきたいというふうに考えています。そこで今回のシンポジウムに出席することを大変楽しみにしてきてました。今回の3日間を通じまして、多くのミュージアム関係者との出会いを今後の活動にぜひとも生かしていきたいと思っております。本日の発表では、当館のさまざまな取り組みの中から、特にコロナ禍に開催されました150周年の企画と、当館の国際交流事業に焦点を当ててご紹介をしたいと思います。2022年、当館は創立150周年を迎えました。日本で最も長い伝統を持つ博物館として、150周年を記念したさまざまな企画を執り行いました。その一つは、この特別展国宝東京国立博物館のすべての開催です。この展覧会は、私が館長に就任した後の最初の特別展でありましたから、従来の特別展の運営にとらわれずに、さまざまな新しい取り組みを実践したところであります。当館は日本の国宝の中で、約 10% にあたる89件の国宝を持っています。例えば、この右側にあります、今から900年以上前の作品、これは当館にある絵画としては、初めて国宝に指定されています。日本の美術作品はご案内のとおり、紙あるいはその布といった材質が極めて脆弱なものが多いので、1回の特別展で国宝のすべてを展示するというのがなかなか難しかったでありますが、今回のこの展覧会で初めてすべてを揃えた展示をいたしました。展示会など、その文化財への気遣いに加えまして、コロナ感染症予防のための入場制限も行うなど、いろんな方面での工夫が必要でしたが、結果的には35万人を超える来館者、お客様にご覧をいただいたというところであります。この次は、もう一つの企画として、150年後に当館で国宝展を開催した場合を想定した企画展、150年後の国宝展、私の未来の宝物という展覧会です。これは今から150年後に国宝に指定されてほしい、あるいはされるべきだと思う、こういったその企業あるいは個人の宝物を国宝の候補として展示する企画をいたしました。この展覧会では、これまでは当館の展示では、これまで長きにわたって大切に受け継がれてきた文化財の展示というものが中心でしたが、今回のこの展示企画では、むしろ逆転の発想で、これから150年後の未来を想像して 身近なものの存在を見つめ直す機会を提供したというものであります。企業からは、ここの映像にもあるようなゴジラとか、あるいはそのハローキティ、競輪など、あるいはその個人からは漫画、キーホルダー、英単語の参考書といった多種多様な展示品が未来の国宝候補として展示されて、メディアをはじめ若い世代の関心を集めて、非常に大きな影響をいただいたというところであります。以上申し上げました2つの企画は、150周年という節目のタイミングに、これまでの歴史を振り返って、今後の博物館の在り方を考える、とても良い機会になったと思っています。続きまして、COVID-19 によります臨時閉館後の新たな取り組みについて、紹介したいと思います。COVID-19 の流行によりまして、東京国立博物館は2020年から一時的に閉館を余儀されなくなりました。こういった状況の中で、当館ではオンラインでの発信をそれまで以上に力を入れるようになっております。YouTube でオンラインギャラリートークをしたり、教育プログラムを配信したり、SNS でもさまざまな企画を開催しました。これは当館所蔵の作品の中から日本全国すべての47都道府県にゆかりのある作品を紹介した企画の例です。東京へのアクセスが困難になった間に、日本中の方に当館を身近に感じていただくように、さまざまなコンテンツを配信いたしました。また、リアルタイムでも教育ワークショップで子ども向けのプログラムを開催したところであります。2020年からは、当館の展示室を再現したメタバースに取り組んでおります。2022年の第2弾改訂版では、新しい空間を制作して、参加者が自由に作品を選択できるという形を取りました。例えばこの映像は、当館が持っている89の国宝をすべて一度に並べて、同時に入室しているアバター同士が会話をすることができるという機能を持たせています。博物館の魅力を幅広く紹介するための重要な手段として、いつでもどこでも誰でも参加できる、このメタバースミュージアムの可能性を今後とも探っていきたいと考えています。SNS におきましては、日本在住の外国人や海外の日本美術愛好者向けに、2021年からツイッター、現在で X、それからインスタグラム、フェイスブックによる英語、中国語、韓国語、それぞれの博物館情報を発信することを開始いたしまして、現在も続けているところであります。海外旅行に厳しい規制がかかって、海外から日本に来れなくなったというタイミングでしたので、日本に渡航できない間でも世界中の人々に当館を身近に感じていただく試みとして対応をしたところであります。最後に、東京国立博物館の国際交流における特に大きな事業とその業績についてご紹介したいと思います。ミュージアム日本美術専門家交流連携事業といいますが、世界中の日本美術に携わるミュージアムスタッフの国際的な学術交流の推進を目的として、2014年から毎年開催してきています。日本美術の作品は海外に数多く渡っておりまして、日本国外の大きな美術館でも十分な知識と経験を有した専門の学芸員が大変多くいらっしゃいます。このプログラムは世界中のミュージアムスタッフが日本の博物館職員と交流することによって、ネットワークの形成、 日本文化、日本美術の展示についての情報交換、それから経験が浅いスタッフへの人材の育成、こういったことを目指しているところであります。具体的には、シンポジウム、ワークショップ、専門家会議、エクスカーションを開催いたしまして、実際に文化財を取り扱う方法を紹介したり、専門家同士の議論を行ったりしています。この右の写真は、今年開催した交流事業の様子です。当館から研究員だけでなくて、博物館教育のスタッフなども協力して、館全体で対応しているというところであります。こうして海外でも多くの日本美術家専門家が活躍している一方で、日本美術の専門家がいない博物館がありまして、海外でありまして、分野的な広がりに対応しきれないなどの課題で、収蔵品が未整理のまま紹介活用がされていないと、こういったコレクションがあります。これまで紹介されてこなかった日本美術作品につきましては、当館の研究員が海外に赴いて、海外の研究員と協力して、その所在や調査の協力を行っています。この写真は、サンフランシスコアジア美術館の当時コレクションを対象として、調査を実施している時の写真であります。このプログラムは2020年以降3年間は COVID-19 の影響によりまして、本事業は対面式での開催が難しくなって、オンラインで実施をしておりました。文化財の取り扱い保存、それからワークショップもビデオを制作してリモートで海外の参加者と共有をしました。時差の関係で、いろいろ問題もありましたが、世界中からご参加いただいて、それまでに培った博物館同士の関係を続けて、今年は対面で再開したというところであります。今年は1月の末に、第10回目のこの事業を3年ぶりに当館で対面での形で再開をいたしました。これまでは北米のミュージアムを中心とした日本美術の交流事業という形を取りましたが、今年からは初めてアジアのミュージアム関係者もお招きして、これまで以上に広く国際的な博物館同士のつながりが深まったのではないかというふうに思っています。今後、より多くの世界中のミュージアムと協力しながら、この事業を推進していきたいと思います。ここでこの事業で形成しましたネットワークによりまして、幻の作品を発見した事例をご紹介したいと思います。昨年2023年に、京都を代表する禅のお寺の東福寺、ここに伝わる国宝重要文化財など約200件を展示する特別展東福寺を当館で開催いたしました。この特別展に向けた事前の調査で、これまで所在不明とされてきた500羅漢図50作品の中の第50号というものが、第二次世界大戦中にベルリン国立アジア美術館から接収されて、行方不明になっていたということが分かりました。そこでベルリン国立アジア美術館に紹介しましたところ、2000年の段階でロシアのエルミタージュ美術館にこの作品があるということが確認されていたということが判明しました。この事実については、これまで日本の国内では全く知られていませんでした。そこでエルミタージュ美術館に紹介したところ、これが現在も保管されているということが確認できたわけです。この件について情報をいただきましたドイツの研究員、それからロシアの研究員、このお二方とも、このミュージアム日本美術専門家交流連携事業 に参加したことがあるメンバーでして、まさにこの事業で形成したネットワークがあったからこそ、作品の再発見ができたということがもたらされたということであります。以上、東京国立博物館のビジョンと近年の国際的な事業の取り組みを紹介しました。以上で私のプレゼンを終わります。Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Fujiwara. Absolutely delighted to find Godzilla in your National Treasures exhibitions. I would love to ask you more about that. Our final speaker is Dr. Chase Robinson, Director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Arts. He received his doctorate from Harvard University. He's a highly regarded scholar of Islamic history and culture, previously served as president of the Graduate Center, the research campus of the City University of New York. He has been very productive, authored, edited 9 books and more than 40 articles that span the geographical and chronological breadth of the Islamic Middle East. Chase was appointed director of the Smithsonian National Museum of Asian Art since 2018. And during his tenure, the museum has launched initiatives that have increased the number of visitors on site and online and expanded the collections by over 5,400 works. He led the museum to expand his network of community-based and international partnership, established itself as the forefront of provenance research, and nearly doubled the size of his board of trustees. So he's certainly the person to talk about partnership. Chase.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's a great pleasure to be here. I cannot exaggerate how much I've learned over the last 2 or 3 days, the friendships I've forged, and the new colleagues that I've found. On behalf of myself, on behalf of my museum, indeed on behalf of the Smithsonian, thank you very much. Now, I must say I was up on this very stage about 3 months ago, and I have to ask myself, what did I do wrong, such that I've been positioned between you and lunch, such that I've been positioned as the very last speaker in the very last panel? I'd like to think that they've saved the best for last, but I'm not sure. So what will I do in response to the circumstances in which I find myself? I will abandon formal comments, a set of remarks that I was going to deliver, and instead I will sacrifice some precision for some provocation. I will organize my comments in 3 parts: history, ambivalence, and experiments. So I begin with some history, and it was a great pleasure to learn about the extraordinary progress that's being made here in West Kowloon, and to set that progress into a larger comparative framework in which one can see in many of the world's leading capitals emerging culture sectors. Good examples, of course, as we heard, are in Doha and Australia and elsewhere. I think I would probably be disciplined if I returned to Washington, D.C. and didn't say something about the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian that boasts, and I think actually it happens to be true, to be the world's largest museum research and education complex. We're located in the National Mall. The majority of our units are on the National Mall. There are 21 or 19, depending on one counts them. An annual operating budget of about $1.6, $1.7 billion. In a typical year, between 25 and 30 million visitors. And this is perhaps should be the first line of description of the Smithsonian, free and open to the public 364 days a year. As I said to a colleague this morning, the reason I joined the Smithsonian is that the museum that I have the privilege of looking after is free and open to the public 364 days a year. Now, the Smithsonian, though founded in the 1840s, was a more or less sleepy place throughout the 19th century. Our museum had a very important role in crystallizing the National Mall as that cultural complex. We are the product of a gift given by Charles Lang Freer in 1906. There's Mr. Freer. I think in reality he did smile sometimes, but his smiles were never captured in photographs. When Mr. Freer died in 1919, he'd collected 9,500 objects that he and his colleagues thought suitable for acquisition, arguably or unarguably, depending on your side of your understanding of things, the single greatest collection ever assembled by an individual. It is a collection of objects, and I use the word objects in a loose sense, a collection of objects that include such works as the Peacock Room. I like to describe it as America's first immersive exhibition. I don't know if that's true or not, but no one has falsified it yet. So I'm going to stick with it. It is a wonderful fusion of European, American, Japanese, and Chinese traditions reflexive both of China mania and Japanism and much more besides. Now, of course, when the museum opened its doors in 1923, we celebrated our centennial last year. We were very proud to celebrate our centennial, not just of America's first museum dedicated to Asian art, but America's first national art museum. And since then, of course, we have grown. Our collection has grown by 5 or 6 times. Our space has grown by 2 or 3 times. We are very fortunate, and I feel myself deeply privileged to look after an institution which has established itself really at the forefront of any number of fields in Asian art history, conservation science. We have 12 going on 14 curators, really an extraordinary group of conservators. It is a wondrous place, and I welcome you all to it. Mr. Freer again, why am I showing this slide? I'm showing this slide, I think, for 2 or 3 reasons. Number one, the photo on the right especially is iconic of the museum. It's iconic for 2 or 3 reasons, one of which is it captures that conversation between East and West that you saw a moment ago in the Peacock Room. Mr. Freer held that there was a universal aesthetic underlying Eastern, or as he tended to call it, Oriental arts and European arts of the finest kind. It also captures Mr. Freer's concentration, rather serious and dour concentration. And what it gets at, and this is the first point of my provocation, I think, the cult of beauty, the aestheticization of cultural artifacts, for which our museum is responsible. In fact, our museum arguably is certainly in the United States, an important, how shall I put it, impulse, engine in the generation of the establishment of Asian art as one of the fine arts. Part 2, ambivalences. If I were to write a manifesto of some legacy art museums, it might read something like this. As Maria pointed out, during my time as director, we've acquired over 5,000 works, extraordinary works, the great majority Japanese, as it happens. Here's a small selection. Deeply proud of these pieces. Some are on display as we speak. But my ambivalences are in part practical, and all of my colleagues who have spoken this morning, I'm sure, must share some version of the challenge that I share, which is, how does one look after these pieces of art? Do we continue forever acquiring? There's one practical consideration. But I think there's another deeper consideration, and here's the second order provocation. I'll put it this way, I'll put it carefully. One-sided accumulation, be it of capital, power, resources, or objects, is, I believe, incompatible with the norms and relationships upon which we can and must build a more sustainable future. Collaborative partnerships, transparency and trust, celebration of difference. Some more works that we've acquired recently. The museum was established, as I said, in 1906, 1919, Mr. Freer's death, 1923, our opening at the beginning of what in retrospect is called the American century, a time of extraordinary cultural confidence, growing internationalism, certainties, if I may, of the Victorian period, even verities. We celebrate our 100th birthday, 2023, 2024, in a very different world, a polycentric world, a world where those verities, those truths have been, well, not just reconsidered, but in some sense rejected, a world in which financial, political, and cultural capital is distributed very differently from how it was distributed in 1923. Mr. Freer saw his museum as, quote, and I'm drawing here on his copious correspondence, a beautiful place filled with things rare and chosen. He was articulating in that, in other respects, an ideology of beauty and rarity. Our museum, a museum of masterworks, authoritatively interpreted, consisting of objects which, as I've already said, have been almost obsessively aestheticized, so as, and apologies for this academic cant, instantiate a universal beautiful. I think there are affinities between this ideology of beauty, universal beauty in particular, and the universalizing claims of some museums and universities for sure. Part 3, experiments. Now, I could talk about several interventions that are taking place in our museum. Again, I welcome you all to visit. I could talk, for instance, about galleries that connect works of art, speak to this desideratum, I'm sure it drives all of us in the museum world, to relevance, that speaks, connects works in our collection to the communities and visitors who come into our galleries. I could talk about interventions in our galleries that give voice to communities and individuals by decentering the museum's authority and the curatorial authority in particular. For instance, an emerging tradition of label writing in which teenagers have their captions alongside curators. I could talk about the experience we're having as we are led by community groups to curate public programs. 10, 15,000 people celebrating Asian art and Asian culture in ways that we as museum leaders, at least in my museum, would not know how to do. By 2050, about 1 out of every 10 American will come from an Asian heritage of some kind. Oh, sorry. I could talk also about our new website. Very pleased to learn that the Prado won a Webby. We won a Webby too. What's significant about our new website is that it is not a vitrine, it's not a marketing. It doesn't say to visitors, come to our museum, come to these exhibitions, come to this program. Of course, we want people to, but that's not what it says. It is a destination itself. Of course, it's a work in progress. We see it as a third set of our galleries. We see it as part of an extension of our free and open to the public, but 24/7. Of course, there is an associated social media strategy as well. But I won't talk about those things. Instead, I'll talk a little bit in the time I have left about collaborations. 2 or 3 years ago, we began to work with the Kyoto Cultural Association. And we worked with the Kyoto Cultural Association and Canon in order to create 19 extraordinarily high-quality facsimiles of some of their masterworks in our Japanese collection. These are works that for legal and conservation reasons cannot circulate. Last year I had the great pleasure of seeing these works in the Kennenji Temple in Kyoto, Kyoto's oldest Zen temple. They are amazing in the natural light. I cannot exaggerate how high the quality is, such that our curators of Japanese will confess reluctantly to having a hard time telling. But the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, alongside making these works accessible, is that it demonstrates how technology and our expertise can be harnessed in such a way as to speak to sustainability, because in fact, it wasn't just a matter of extraordinarily high quality digital imaging, it was also an investment on the part of our colleagues at the Kyoto Cultural Institution in the local crafts of mount making. So it is technology harnessed in support of, shall we say, traditional crafts. Another very different example of collaboration, another experiment. We work closely with the Qatar National Library. Manuscripts, as some of you know, are hard to read, hard to appreciate. This is a manuscript of a work written by someone named Al-Jazari, his Kitab al-Hiyal. It's a book of automata. It is a work of pre-modern Islamic engineering and also thought experiments. We're working with our colleagues in Doha and in Singapore to animate some of these manuscript illustrations, to demonstrate how these automata work, to make them accessible on microsites, of course, in Arabic and in English. A third experiment of collaboration. About 18-20 months ago, the ambassador from Yemen came to the museum, soliciting our input into a really important project, which was the repatriation of some 77 objects that had been confiscated by American law enforcement officials. For obvious reasons, these objects cannot currently be returned to Yemen, so they have been legally repatriated, and we are working collaboratively with the Yemenis, putting them on display, doing research, and also taking the opportunity to tell important stories about the connection between art, collecting, violence, political dissolution, and more besides. About 6,000 miles away from Yemen is Cambodia. Yannick mentioned Cambodia. Another partnership that we have, another collaboration, another experiment. We are working very closely with our colleagues in Cambodia to help them repatriate pieces, and here again I'll provoke, I suppose, that have been removed and deracinated from their cultural context, that have been aestheticized and sit in collections of as works of art, rather than the agents of culture, of memory, of belonging that they had originally been. Working very closely with colleagues, bringing to bear our expertise, such as it is in conservation especially, but also curatorial affairs. Finally, and here I'll move to a conclusion, how did these objects get here? I hear that in the galleries. How did these objects get here? Our Japanese scroll paintings didn't roll into our museum. Our manuscript folios didn't float. They came to our museum under circumstances. As Yannick said, my words, not yours. Provenance research can make museum directors nervous. I believe that provenance research, not just for reasons of addressing legal liability, or in the case of Smithsonian policies, legal liabilities and ethical liabilities, but also as object histories, I believe it's an immensely important part of not just our museum's future, but other museums' future. Answering that question, how did these objects get here? No museum, I venture to say, in the world of our size has more provenance researchers or is trying to do, sponsoring research, webinars, fundamental research, convening international conferences that pull together provenance researchers, making freely and openly available all of our provenance data, and also writing provenance and object history stories into our galleries. To conclude, museums are places for objects, of course, and now for intangible cultural objects, digital files, NFTs, and the like. But even more, I think museums are places of ideas. And we can express our ideas through objects in any number of ways, but we all need to be mindful of what those ideas are. To be in the museum sector in 2024 is an exciting time to be operating in this polycentric, globalized world. If it means anything, it seems to me, it means that we need to engage in new ways of knowledge making. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robinson. Please be seated. As we prepare the stage for the upcoming panel discussion and Q&A session, just a warm reminder, if you'd like to submit your questions, feel free to scan the code that is being shown on the screen. Then you'll be able to submit your questions to the moderators and our speakers. For those who are watching online on the live streams, don't forget to take a look at the Q&A box. Write your questions there and send in your questions. Our moderator later will post a couple of questions to our guest speakers, and